In this lecture, we're going to use our knowledge of controlled components to create a reusable component out of a third-party library. There will be cases where you'll want to use a third-party library in your app that doesn't support Vue. It's probably written in vanilla JavaScript or jQuery. This will mean you'll have to convert it into a Vue component manually. The best and easiest way is to convert it into a controlled component. Once it's a controlled component, we'll be able to use it multiple times across various projects. For this example, we'll be using a library called Emoji-Button. It's a library for selecting emojis. We can use it to fill in an input field. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to the library. We'll find a demo to see how it works. It's a simple widget. We have a button we can click to open a selection of emojis. Something like this can be useful as an input. If we scroll to the bottom, we'll find an example of installing and using the library. We'll be doing something similar to what is documented on this page. Let's get started. The first thing you'll need to do is download the starter files. You'll find a zip file in the resource section of this lecture. Upload the files anywhere on your system and install its dependencies. Pause the video if you need to. Here's what the project will look like. We're using Bootstrap to help us position things. There's one input with a button. We'll make this button clickable to open the selection of emojis. The input is not modifiable. It's set to read only. Next, let's open the project in the editor. Most of the files are from the default preset. The changes I've applied beforehand were made to the app component file in the source directory. In this file, we have the form where we're listening to the submit event. If it's triggered, we'll call a function called submit. Lastly, we have the input. It doesn't have anything attached to it. In the script block, not much is going on. We have the submit method, which will log the emoji data property. The emoji data property is set to an empty string. We aren't using it in the template. That's something we'll hook up in a moment. We are going to convert the emoji input into a controlled component. This is where things will get tricky because the library has a completely different API from Vue. We'll need to convert it into a Vue-compatible component. In the components directory, create a file called Emoji-Input.Vue. We'll scaffold the file with the template and script blocks. It's considered good practice to give the component a name. We'll set the name option to Emoji Input. We can grab the template from the app component. Search for the div tag with the class input group. It's surrounding the input and button elements. We'll cut this element from the app component. We'll paste it into the template block of the emoji input component. Next, we'll import the emoji input component into the app component. Then, we'll register it in the app component by adding the components option. Lastly, we can use the emoji input component. Back in the form, we'll load the component where we previously cut the input and button. Let's check out the page in the browser. If we did everything right, we will see everything remain the same. We've successfully outsourced the input into a separate component. We'll want to make it functional by using the library. The library will need to be installed as a dependency if we're going to use it. Open the command line. If the server is running, turn it off. Next, run the following command: npm i@joe@tardy/emoji-button. Next, start the server again. Lastly, open the app component. We're going to quickly bind the emoji data property to the emoji input component by using the v-model directive. The directive will do two things. It'll add a prop to the component called model value. Remember, a controlled component doesn't have a state. Its data will come from the parent component. In this case, It would be the emoji data property from the app component. The second thing it'll do is listen for the update model value event. It'll use the value emitted from the component to update the emoji data property. It's important we send the emoji back up to the parent component by emitting an event. Let's get started on making the component functional. In the emoji input component, we'll need to import the emoji button object from the package. The path to the package is @joeattardi/emojibutton. This package will expose the methods necessary for rendering the emoji box. We'll be using it in a moment. First, we should accept the model value prop from the parent component. Add the props option to the component. In the array, add the model value prop. There are two locations where we'll be using the model value prop. In the template, we have an input that's set to read only. We'll want to update the value of the input with the emoji. We'll bind the value attribute to the model value prop. The model value prop will be set to the emoji selected by the user. When we use the library will store the emoji in an object. If we want to access the emoji, we'll need to access a property called emoji. The second location where we'll render the emoji is in the button's inner text. However, there is a problem. Initially, the model value prop will be an empty string because the parent component sets it to an empty string. We don't want the button to be empty when it gets rendered. We can fix this problem with a ternary operator. In the button, we'll add an expression that has the following: model value model value dot emoji select. This expression will make sure the button is never empty. We can move on to instantiating the picker. The picker will appear below the button. That's where we'll place it. The picker won't be able to position itself unless the component has been mounted. We must instantiate the picker after it's been mounted. The mounted phase is when the component's template is inserted into the document. We'll add the mounted lifecycle function to the component. Inside the function, we'll define a variable called picker. Its value will be a new instance of the emoji button object. This new instance will create the picker. The next step is to listen for when an emoji is selected. The picker will emit an event that we can listen to. Using the picker object, we'll call the on function to listen for an event called emoji. In the arrow function, we'll be provided a value called emoji. We'll accept it in the function. In the function, we'll emit an event because we want the parent component to handle the value. Call the thisEmit function. The name of the event we'll emit will be called updateModelValue. It's the name of the argument the vModel directive is listening for. We'll send the emoji argument we were given. We're almost finished. The last thing we'll do is render the picker. Creating a new instance of the picker will not display it on the page. It'll prepare it for it to be rendered. We only want to render the picker if the button was clicked. The problem is we can't use the vOn directive on the button to listen for the event. The instance of the picker is only accessible in the mounted lifecycle function. We can resolve this issue by using refs. Refs are another way of selecting elements in a component. In the template, we'll add a ref to the button. We'll call the button Emoji-Button. Back in the mounted function, we'll store the ref in a variable called btn. Its value will be this.refs.emoji-btn. The ref will give us access to the native DOM JavaScript API. We can use it to listen to events on the button. At the end of the function, we'll call the addEventListener function to listen to the click event. In the callback function, we can render the picker by using the picker.togglePicker function. The togglePicker function has one argument, which is the element it should appear next to. We'll pass him the btn ref restored. We're finished. Let's give things a test. Refresh the page in the browser. The input will remain empty and the button will say Select. Open the View Developer Tools to check the data of the app component. The emoji data property is an empty string. Let's select an emoji. After selecting an emoji, the data property is updated to the emoji we selected. To double check, let's submit the form, and the developer tools will switch to the console. The form is able to log the emoji without a problem. Great! We've successfully ported the library into a controlled component. There's one last adjustment we'll make. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to the API options page for the plugin. This page documents the options we can use with the picker. Scroll down to the section called API. These are all the options we can use with the picker. Search for the option called Position. The description says, the position to display the picker relative to the reference element. This is the option we'll want to set. The value, bottom, will position the picker below the button, which is where we want it. We're going to support every option in the plugin. Currently, we want to change the position, but in the future, we may want to configure other options. It would be best if we can allow for any of the options to be modified. We'll be using props to modify the options. We're not limited to the v-model directive. We can update the controlled component to accept an object of options which will pass onto the new instance of the emoji picker. Back in the editor, we're going to update the props option for the emoji input component. Instead of an array of props, we'll use an object. The object syntax can be used to fine-tune the props that can be used with the component. We'll add the model value prop back in. Its value must be an object. In the object, we can specify additional options for the prop. For example, we can set the required property to true. This property will make it required for the parent component to provide a value prop. By default, this is false. We'll add another prop called options. We're not going to make the options prop required. However, we'll set a default value in case the developer doesn't provide the options prop. We'll add a property called default. This must be a function that returns the default value. We'll return an empty object. The options prop will be passed onto the new instance of the emoji button. This will allow us to modify any of the options in the parent component. In most cases, you will want to filter the options. It's safer to validate the options before using them. For this demonstration, we won't be doing that for the sake of simplicity. Let's go back to the app component. We'll bind the options property on the emoji input component. It'll be set to an object. We wanted to change the position of the picker. Let's check if the picker is positioned correctly in the browser. Great! Its behavior can be modified by the parent component. This is another example of how we can use the controlled component design pattern to create flexible and reusable components.